Welcome to the Future of Structures podcast, where we talk to the experts who are evolving our buildings for tomorrow. And here is your host, Adam Jones.
Today we are interviewing Daryl Browning. He's the CEO of ISPT Super Property. So ISPT manage over $14 billion of Australia's largest industry super funds. So they invest in some of our biggest developments like commercial, retail, industrial and residential property in Australia. In our conversation, we go through personal leadership. So Daryl has a philosophy of training everyone at his company as leaders. So we go through what are the types of things that he looks for in his leaders and how he trains his team. Apart from that, we also go through his career journey and we have a look at why everybody is in sales, not just your typical salesperson, but even your classic engineer, some of the most influential books in his life, and then also the industry as a whole as it's changing, and some of the things that affect, I guess, the property market as a whole. So he's a great guy, absolute legend. I really enjoyed speaking to him. I hope you guys enjoy listening to him. Here is Daryl Browning.
Well, it's been I won't say a topsy-turvy, but I'd describe it probably as a series of zigzags. Originally I picked a property course when I was at school at Wangaratta, and to be honest, because it was the shortest course, it was 2 years instead of 3 and 4 years for most degrees, and plus I went to a tech school, so you were limited with the range of options. I'd seen a valuer, thought he had a flash car and got to work outside, and that was the primary attraction to the role.
Yeah, nice. So were you like passionate about property or anything, or were you just going
really,
with the flow at the
It
start?
was, ironically, at one stage, career people at Wangaratta Tech thought I should be a teacher. And it's sort of ironic how things pan out in your career. Probably a lot of what I do is almost teaching or helping people to learn throughout your career.
Yeah.
And then pretty much came to Melbourne, family relocated, went to RMIT. Probably found that transition pretty tough coming from the country. Smaller classes, I won't say spoon-fed, but a very different environment, hitting RMIT and not really knowing that many people. So I left after about a year and studied part-time, completed my degree, and ended up working at all places a tax office.
Okay.
Because they had a valuation section, so the objective was get over there, get trained, and then work out what would happen later. So I ended up 10 years in the public service, and then got out of there and got into real estate mainstream.
Yep. So it seems like a pretty big jump. So what I guess is some of the skills you learned when you were in the tax industry still relevant?
Look, more the valuation training. I had some great bosses at the time, a fellow called Frank Votier, who I'd say gave me a lot of my life skills, which was really, always focus on trying to get the best out of people, create a sort of non-combative approach. I still use words like that he used to use was, it's a friendly debate. It's never an argument.
Yep.
It's two professionals might be discussing a pointed issue and try and find a solution, not end up in dispute where you can't advance. And then otherwise it was really making the change from what, was an introverted environment. I went and did residential sales, which was really good, but because it did make me a bit more outgoing, but ended up probably missing the numeracy and numbers side of it. The sales part was great, which I got some good skills at that and was quite successful. And then subsequently, an old colleague rang me up and said, come and work, we've got a new property team going at the state government. And I'll probably say that's where I probably learnt as much as any of the roles I've had in some respects.
Yeah, okay. So you mentioned sales. So do you think sales is relevant to, I guess, a lot of people rather than just the people in the traditional sales positions?
I think most people don't realise we're all in sales. No matter what role you've got, whether you're selling up the line, down the line, naturally people think if you're market facing, you're in a sales role, but we're all doing it. Probably now I think there's greater recognition that you're responsible for your own brand.
Yep.
You're responsible for your own career. And I think as we're now seeing the economy globally evolve, you're very much in control of your own destiny. So if you can pick up skills that can help you promote yourself, identify the unique features that make you valuable to an employer or a corporation, they're really good selling skills. So what you're trying to do is really show the benefits of someone hiring you and bringing your set of skills, how you might fit in with their team for 1 + 1 = 4 result.
Yep.
Not the old 3. I think everyone's looking for something a bit more.
Yeah. So I guess you said everything seems to be evolving in that kind of direction. So do you think, what about the person out there who's just an engineer goes to their work, their day-to-day job, and doing very similar things to everyone else in the office? Like, in what way are they in sales, do you think?
Look, I think ultimately the market's changed, and the world used to be driven by time, how much experience you've got, etc. I think now everything's shortened up, and you're about demonstrating value solutions to clients. So really, it's up to the technical people in the organisations to realise where they fit into the puzzle and make sure that they are demonstrating the value of, let's say, the solution of X or Y or a particular technical solution, be able to actually do it. So I'd almost say it should be mandatory that everyone does a little bit of sales training.
Yep.
More to be able to unpick and understand how you fit in to the ecosystem that is the corporate world.
And I guess, would you put things like pitching an idea in a meeting or selling ideas? Is that, I guess, would you link that to sales as well?
Absolutely.
Yep.
I think promoting an idea, a concept, your own skills, but probably the essence of it is to try and work out what's different. I did an interview the other day of a potential employee for here, and the hook that got me interested in this candidate was he talked about how in bids that he was involved in, they tried to identify an X factor. What's that point of difference? What's the trigger for value? To try and draw that out and make sure that that's paramount. Because the days of being someone wading through, a 20, 50-page submission, I think people's attention span's pretty short. You've got to get the hook in early.
Yep.
The old watch for the body language. Do they move forward?
Yep.
Are they picking up the interest? They're the skills to really be alert to, because sometimes the technical solution may not actually be what they're after. They're after a commercial solution.
Yep.
May not be the optimal technical one.
Yeah, okay. Nice. So just maybe moving on to a little bit about ISPT before we move on to how you guys train everybody and that kind of stuff. But can you just tell us a little bit about ISPT, what you guys do?
Well, ISPT is essentially a property fund manager owned by our investors, which is quite unique. So a range of industry funds, pension funds, some of them from the not-for-profit sector. Plus we also have groups like Victorian Funds Management Corporation, WorkCover, TAC, etc., etc. The spread is quite large, from Australian super at sort of $4 billion down to some groups that have only maybe got 5 or 10 million. And our job's to invest that money, let's call it superannuation money, into property primarily in Australia. So we run 3 or 4 different investment pools, which are called funds. The core fund is the main one. That's about 11.5 billion. That's probably our flagship and what we get recognised for. That's got about 70 assets scattered around Australia, ranging from Prime Minister's office in Canberra through to shopping centres. We own part of Doncaster, GPO in Melbourne, etc., etc. Our second fund is just a single office fund. 50 Lonsdale Street was our first big development, now valued at about $600 million. And then what we call IRAP, which is the ISPT Retail Australia Property Trust. That's about 1.4 billion, owns about 40 neighbourhood shopping centres, mainly anchored by Coles, and with a broad geographic distributions. Our job is drive the income, do development, buy and sell assets as the case may be. And for that, we've got about 130 staff scattered around the country. But we're mainly an outsourced model, so we probably use another 600 to 1,000 people, whether they're property managers, valuers, service consultants, architects, engineers, etc.
Nice. So I understand that ISPT train everyone as leaders. So why do you think everybody in the organisation has a responsibility to be a leader?
I suppose it was a bit of a realisation we had when I first took over as CEO. A lot of recruits that we were getting had very, very limited professional development. Yes, they'd had an occasional technical course, but very, very few of them really had their eyes opened, as I called it. So what we did was look at a couple of areas that we thought we could, and the term is get all boats to rise with the tide. So the two things we picked for all staff to do were a presentation course, so everyone went through the same course, and a negotiating course, which on many occasions came back to haunt me when people would want to negotiate salary increases or whatever. But the leadership one, I suppose, I've been here for a while now, and I thought, what was probably the single thing I could do that might leave a lasting legacy? And that was to get people to think about how they are in control of their own destiny. And so with Linda Smith, our head of people and culture, we came up with the concept of that we would run a 4-module bespoke leadership development program for ISPT. So that's been running for 3 to 4 years. Each one of those intakes has 20 odd people in it. So we haven't done all staff, but we've done about 65, and we've just kicked off the most recent version, because one of the things you forget is when you're recruiting, your workforce is changing all the time. So some of the messages dilute. Yeah.
And so do you think it's when you, train people to let them know they're in control of their own destiny, is it like a double-edged sword where, some people might find out that they really belong at ISPT, and on the other hand, some people realise maybe they, need to...
Look, I'm quite upfront with saying to people that, not everyone's ambitions will be realised here. We'll do the best we can to enable you to advance, but the reality is we're not a sort of endless pool of opportunity. Occasionally I will encourage someone to actually make application for a job I might see in the paper and say, look, that'd be really good for your career. Some take it up, some don't. But more it's to try and say, well, how can we as an organisation be the best we can? And to do that, individuals have to be the best they can be. And it's to try and get them, and I look back at my own career and I can tell you when the light bulb moment was. It was when I was in state government and got dragged kicking and screaming to a management course. And a particular fellow, Dr. Roy Gilbert, just made a very subtle comment, and he said something like, our job was not to build houses, it was get people in housing. And that little light bulb moment, I'd say, was probably a turning point for me. So we're trying to turn that light bulb moment on for as many people as we possibly can, and challenge them to think about what they're doing before necessarily acting, pretty much based on the old rule of, measure twice, cut once.
Yeah, nice. So you mentioned you creating a culture where everyone where all boats rise, you mentioned. I guess, is that how's that going? Because I guess from a lot of my experience and some of my other friends who are in other corporates, not always, everyone just out for the team. Sometimes individuals are, I guess, trying to just, further their own career rather than have the team mentality. So is that
Yeah, we've probably, and I've worked in those environments, I must say, on just commission only. So that does lead to a, winner take all, kill what you can type approach. But I think the price of it sometimes is very expensive. And at the end of the day, I remember a little program we did, and money was sort of thrown in to create this intense competition and it basically ended up carnage with the teams becoming dysfunctional. So I've always thought, yes, you've got to have smart individuals, but they also need to be able to function to make the team get there. Linda, head of HR, and people, we're always having this debate because, someone will say X person is not good enough, and I say, but even a sporting team's got to have a minimum number of players to be able to play. And a sporting team only has to peak maybe, 20 games in the season, and then if they get to the finals, another four games or so. Whereas in the corporate world, you're trying to get a much bigger team of people to peak more regularly across the whole gamut of the year. So let's focus how we can do that. Here, our remuneration, we get remunerated probably a small portion individually. This is incentive-wise. But then it's got to be the success of the team as a whole, rather than the other way around. I think the problem with the other way around is it's often the most cunning that exploit those systems, and those that maybe do the work and the technical people that enable it to happen miss out. So look, we've probably got it 90% of the way, but never, nirvana won't happen.
No, that's awesome. Last time I heard you speak, you mentioned about an analogy of, I think it was something to do with like a team chopping down a tree in a jungle or something, and then perhaps getting to the end and finding out they're in the wrong jungle or something like that. So can you just explain that analogy a little bit?
Look, one of the challenges for everyone is that you get so busy doing what you're doing. The old saying would be, head down, backside up type approach. And the real danger with that is, unless someone's looking out on the horizon for what might be coming at you or what opportunities, the analogy is, yes, you could be a really good timber cutter, but you're actually in the wrong forest. And with the world changing quickly, and it's always changed. I mean, go back to the pioneer days. They never, in the days of the Westerns or cowboys and Indians, they never used to send the whole troop out. They would send a scout out or a forward scout out to see what was going on. And if he didn't come back, the rest of the troop or the pioneers would head off in another direction. So there's a bit of that, I think, in the corporate world, where you need to be always looking. And the little trick I often do if I think someone's perhaps a bit more inward focused is I'll buy them a toy helicopter or say, no, I want you in the helicopter so that you can keep up and have perspective of a much broader horizon. And you might duck down occasionally and have to land to refuel or attend to a matter, but get back up in the air watching what's going on because, bushfire might be coming at you, a flood, tornado or whatever. Or, it could be economically that's heading towards you. So have the feelers out and bring the intelligence back and then try and draw some conclusions and, as we call them, have a house view of what's going on in the world.
Nice. And do you think that applies, I guess, at the organisational level, but does that apply also at the personal level if you're working really hard day to day in your career and without ever taking a step back to thinking about the bigger picture of the direction you're heading?
I think that's right. I think first thing, they say you've got to look after your own health because you can't look after anyone else's. And always try and keep that balance, because the risk is if technical people are prone to do it, bids come in. I think if you go too hard for too long, you do lose perspective, and you might miss that little edge or something because you're just fatigued. Equally, the same applies. Get a fresh set of eyes to look at something. Don't drag everything in thinking you can solve it. Try and get someone else to look at it and look at it through the eyes of the customer, or if it's a bid, if you were judging this, what would you think? Always try and vary the inputs a little bit.
Cool. And I guess just hopping into that helicopter a bit now, what do you see anything coming in the future for the industry? Any forces that are, I guess, on the horizon, good or bad?
Well, the reality is there's always good and bad, and markets go in cycles, which means our businesses are very cyclical based on how the economy's going. There's no doubt there's a lot of change in the way we work, and therefore the way people are remunerated. will change. I'm not sure all of it's for the better, but then in any environment, no matter how savage the change, there's always those that win and those that lose. And as I say to our people, we've got to adapt. You can't stop progress. You might, and probably with this sort of .com and digital boom that we've got going on, the thing that we try and focus on is like, how long is this going to take to evolve? Because as we saw back in the 2000s and the .com boom there, a lot of groups were too early and blew up and destroyed a lot of capital, as much by being too early as normally people would say, oh, well, don't get to the party too late. But I think it's trying to find that balance. But I really think there has been change. I often think of my grandparents and think one of them was born, I think, 1895. And you think of the change she saw in her lifetime. Yes, things have sped up with Moore's Law and everything like that, but I just wonder if we're, if you watch the Jetsons, as I used to do as a little boy, a lot of those things haven't happened. And that was in the 1950s.
Yeah.
So we're still not flying around in our own personal car.
Yeah, definitely.
And the robots are just coming to do the vacuuming.
Yeah. I guess it's, but no one at the same time would have seen iPhones and things like that. So it is, I guess it's hard to predict what's coming. What do you think is coming? If you had to bet on, I guess, a few technologies or a few trends, is there anything you could be more sure of?
I think the pace of change is the one, and as a father and a grandfather now, it's how are people going to share in the rewards of technology and industry, etc. Because at the end of the day, the economic model now is that we go to school, we get trained so we behave ourselves, we pick up some technical skills, we go into the workforce, try and make our way there in a range of teams and generate revenue. And then we as the individual get a share of that revenue. And so we're effectively bartering our intellectual knowledge or our artisan skills for money that we then trade for shelter, food, entertainment, etc., etc.
Yeah.
It certainly looks like there is a peak or an increase in the inequality going on in the world. In previous history, that's always meant conflict, which, you'd love to live your lifetime and not see any wars or things like that happen. But I think when any one group gets too much share of the pie, that tends to happen. And for the individual, you need to be occupied, you need to be stimulated, you need to be intellectually challenged. How will that happen in the workplace of the future, I think, is sort of what goes through my silly head more often than not. I dare say that happened back in the 1800s when industrialisation was coming, through the industrial expansion post Second World War, etc. So there's always change, and I think it's just equip people to be able to adapt to it as best they can.
Yeah.
We've got a few threats, obviously, climate change. If that accelerates, it could be a lot hotter and colder world, which sounds silly, but that's the reality.
Yeah. So I guess you just mentioned climate change there, and there's for us to combat it, it's probably going to be a team effort for a lot of people in the industry. So who do you think should take, responsibility for it, and how do we get everyone to collaborate if it's necessary?
Well, there's a couple of different things. I mean, here our sustainability policy really, I'd see is that we've got two objectives. One is to make sure where we invest money is preserved and is not destroyed through bad physical placement or bad economic placement. And then on the other hand is everything that we do, and the term we coined was do no harm. Now, at the end we came with that because it's very simple to understand. You can talk a lot about what you might positively do, but I think if everyone started with a position of, whether I'm dealing with someone, whether I'm building something, whether everything I'm doing, I'm aiming to make a positive impact, but not negatively impact the planet. The challenge is that everyone should do whatever they can, depending on your economic circumstances. And it's very easy to criticise third world countries, but even in Australia, our own waste is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
I often think about clothing in the terms, fast fashion they call it, which is basically disposable. Wear it once or twice and chuck it away. But that's because the labour inputs to it are so low from a cost perspective. People don't respect its value.
Yep.
So I think we probably have to get back to where people aren't so disposably minded and regard everything they buy as a bit of an investment. And then you're probably more inclined to focus on quality, not quantity.
You mentioned sustainability is one of the values you guys hold. What other things make a good investment, or I guess go through your decision making when you invest in something?
Well, we probably look at a range of things, and often people will say, good property. And first principle is it should be a good investment, as I call it, the fundamentals. And then we've got criteria about where we will invest, and what we're trying to do is manage risk. So whenever we're doing something, we try and assess the range of risks that might put that money in jeopardy, ranging from the physical to the economic to the something we were looking at the other day, a shopping centre, and everything was fine. And I said, well, what about flooding? And someone said, I don't know. And I said, well, have you been watching the press with the hurricanes in America, and also with climate change? It was a tropical area. Oh, okay, hadn't thought about that. But so we went off and did a piece of work. Yeah, it'll get the tick. Yep. But in 50 years, it might be a problem. Yep. So the shot would be have an exit plan where, or mitigation works or whatever. But it just no one asked the question.
Yep.
So it's make sure you've got comprehensive checklists so that nothing falls through the cracks.
Nice. I guess changing gears a bit as we start to bring it to a close. You've mentioned books before we started the interview. Is there any books that you've read or been the most influential on your career that you might recommend?
Probably one which might be getting a little bit out of date now, but it was You Can Negotiate Anything by a fellow called Herb Cohen. And then, look, as much as anything, it's try to read a range of different things, articles, watch different perspectives so that you don't end up in a tunnel. And I think that's one of the challenges if you are a technically trained person, that you tend to concentrate in your own area of expertise and not really have a wide angle lens on what's happening in the world. I think if you can focus on that, then from a technical perspective, what you're able to create and advise on would be so much better. And from an engineering point of view, I can always remember we had a problem shopping centre in Spain that was flooding, and an engineer came back in the basements. This was. Engineer came back with a solution that said put 1.8 metres of concrete to hold the thing in the ground because of aquifer under it. Of course, a car park's only about 2.2 metres. We wouldn't have been able to park any cars, but actually an Australian engineer who's well known, Kevin Winwood, came up with a solution of micro piles and 300 mil of concrete, which solved the problem and we can park the cars.
Yeah, it's a bit easier when you got Kevin Winwood on the job, I think.
That's right. So again, it's this perspective. Try and listen to different groups and diverse views, both internally and externally, and then read a range of things. And I always put it down to one thing: be curious. I was watching my grandson 2 days ago, and he was just looking everywhere. He's watching what was going on and just taking it in. So don't get caught with just tunnel focus.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, Daryl. I think that's a great way to finish the interview. So thanks for coming on the show.
Okay. All the best.
Hey guys, Adam here. Just before you go, just one quick request. If you're enjoying the show, please leave a review. It helps our rating and ranking on iTunes, so more people can hear from the people who are making our cities better places for our future.